So before we get into the bulk of the presentation, I do want to take a minute and introduce everybody to Jeffrey Schiffman. Jeffrey is our new lead planner at the city of Flint. So you might remember Kevin Schrantz, who originally had the position, then succeeded by Adam Moore. And now after a lengthy wait, we do have a new lead planner, Jeffrey. And I will let him do the give you some more background on his experience. But before we do that, I want to do a quick introduction to Poll Everywhere. So if you have not been in our previous meetings, this is a platform that we use to get feedback from everyone. We're going to be asking some questions before and after the presentation, just to help us evaluate how effective the presentation is and whether we need to add more into the curriculum next year. So in order to do this, if you are watching the Zoom meeting on your computer, you might find it easier to use your phone. You can either open up a new browser window on your phone or just text message. If you're watching this on your phone or tablet, you might find it easier to log on to a computer. Either way is fine. It's pretty easy either way. So the other thing that I want to point out here, the surveys are completely anonymous, so we aren't recording any names, phone numbers, emails, any identifying information. So the instructions to log into this platform, if you are using a web browser, just go to the URL pollev.com/COF community. That link should be in the chat box, so you can just click that. Otherwise, if you do want to use text message, you can go ahead and text the number 22333 and just enter the word COF community and send. And you should get a response saying you're active, and then you can respond to the prompts. So we are going to do a quick test run here. On a scale of 1 to 5, what is your energy level today? If it is very low, click or text the letter A. If it is low, click or text the letter B, medium C, high D, and very high E. And if you are on the lower half of that, get ready, because we're talking land use and zoning. So we are going to get amped, we're going to get excited, and we're going to learn a lot of fun and exciting information. All right, we're relatively energetic. That's actually interesting. We are exactly evenly split. I feel that. So cool. It looks like we got quite a few responses here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Whoops. All right. So our first evaluation question is, I know what types of activities are allowed in Flint's various zoning districts according to the draft zoning ordinance. If you know nothing about this, go ahead and click or send the letter E. If you have heard of this, you know that there's a land use plan and a zoning code, but you don't really know what it has to do with. Click the letter D. If you're not sure, maybe yeah, click C. If you have heard of it and you know a little bit about it, click the letter B. And if you definitely are an expert, you know the ins and outs of the proposed zoning code, go ahead and click the letter A. All right, so again, a fairly even split. I'm sure that everybody is well familiar with this, with the notion of the zoning code. It's been being deliberated by City Council for a few years now. So you might have heard reference to it, but we're going to give a little bit of an update and some more information about it tonight. Okay, so it looks like we're leaning towards not knowing so much about it, so that's good to know. The next thing, I know the difference between a land use or structure, and we're going to get very technical here. You are not going to be quizzed at the end, so don't worry. But if you know the difference between a land use or structure that is permitted by right, an accessory to another use, a special use, or an additionally regulated use. If you definitely know what the difference is, that is letter A. If you mostly know the difference, that's letter B. If you're not sure, that's C. If you mostly do not know, then that is D. And if you definitely do not know the difference between a land use or structure that is permitted by right, accessory, special use, or an additionally regulated use, click the letter E. All right, and we're again roughly the same level of knowledge that we saw at the previous question, so that's good to know. I do want to point out really quickly, this is another reason why it's good to have the meeting packet materials, because we do have these two informational packets. The first one is Zoning Districts Quick Reference Guide. So this provides a pretty simple overview of the different zoning districts. And then we also have the master use table. This is really nice because you can look up, oh, well, I want to start a welding shop, not a wedding shop, and other metalworking machine shops. Where can I do that? And then I look here and, oh, look, I can do it in these different zoning districts. So that's very helpful, especially if you're looking at where can I do a community garden? Where can I grow food? Where can I grow food for commercial production, etc. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jeffrey.
Good evening, everyone. As Michael said, my name is Jeffrey Schiffman. I'm the new lead planner at the city of Flint. I've been with the city since the middle of November. Have only been in Michigan since the end of August. We relocated from Cleveland for my wife's job, but I'm happy to be here and happy to contributing to the city of Flint and getting this zoning code underway. It's an odd time to relocate and start a new job when you can't really meet folks in person yet, but hopefully I'll get to know all of you in person very soon as we return back to normal. So I want to start with just kind of a basic thing. What is a zoning code? For those, I think a lot of people here, Flint seems to have very involved citizens, so I think some of you already know this, but for those that don't, I just want to kind of lay that out at the beginning. The zoning code, basically in its most simple terms, is the way our regulations that a city puts in place to govern how land is used and how intensely it's used. So can a particular piece of land be used for residential structures? Can it be used for a commercial structure, an industrial structure? And if it can be used for residential, is it single family homes? Is it multifamily homes? Is it a big apartment building? That gets into the intensity part. Commercial, is it a small, community bodega or quickie mart, or is it a full blown grocery store or a whole strip center? Those are the kind of things that the zoning code lays out. And why are we doing new zoning code? The most basic reason is that Flint's zoning code is very old. It was developed in the 60s, and it had some update in the 70s, but it hasn't really been touched since then. It was probably touched in the late 90s, early 2000s to add things about wireless cell tower communication structures, but I don't think it's been touched otherwise since then. There are whole things that you see in everyday life now that aren't even contemplated in our zoning code. And the zoning code sort of goes in hand with a master plan. And as I'm sure most of you remember, Flint's master plan was updated for the first time in 50 years in 2013. So the master plan has been adopted, and it contemplates all these new uses and new zones. And the kind of the last step in getting it implemented and fully absorbed is to get this zoning code passed. So these first initial slides are just kind of talking about the Imagine Flint master plan, kind of the overview, just to refresh everybody's memory. But it was really a community effort. There were 21 residents who came together and formed a steering committee, and they kind of guided the master plan through its entire process. As I said, the previous plan was written in 1960 and was not updated in any way. the new plan really kind of tries to incorporate things that matter today, like social equity and sustainability, quality of life for everybody, reshaping the economy, adapting land uses to changing life and the changing landscape in Flint today in 2021. Um, it was inclusive. There were, coming from out of the city, the fact that Flint got over 5,000 residents and stakeholders to participate in over 300 meetings, that is very impressive. That's the kind of thing that most planners dream about, that getting that sort of feedback and that sort of participation. And what the city at the time and the consultants that put this master plan together were trying to do was come up with some fresh approaches to some longstanding issues in the city. And most master plans are designed to last usually 10 to 20 years. They might get periodic updates every 5 years, but the typical lifespan is a 10 to 20 year lifespan with some updates here and there, and usually a zoning code update is generally incorporated into that master planning process. You want to go to the next? Michael, are you controlling the slides? Okay. I wanted to put this map on here just because I think it's great. Each dot that you see on the map was a public meeting that was held and got participation from people. And these were various meetings. Sometimes they were in the individual wards. They were workshops. Some were like visioning meetings and steering committee meetings. But you can see they were all over the city. They weren't just downtown. They weren't just at City Hall. The city really tried to get out into the neighborhoods and get people where they were, so it was easy for them to come and participate, which is one of the reasons that there was so much participation in that process. So a zoning code overview. Again, it's basically the administration, enforcement, and amendment of the zoning code has to be consistent with the master plan. So we have a new master plan, but we don't have a new zoning code. So really, to get the master plan fully implemented, we need to pass this zoning code, try it out for a few years. There obviously are going to be things that need to be worked out as people start using it, and we'll realize where the wrinkles are at, and then it can be amended from there. Like I said, 1968 zoning code, it's outdated, it's cumbersome, it's not business friendly, it's not friendly to homeowners or to residents. Doing things with your property is not very easy under the old zoning code because it just doesn't fit today's landscape. And I always like this point out, I'm trained as an attorney and a city planner, so the zoning code, if we don't pass it, we're not in compliance with state law. And also, when we got that great HUD grant a few years ago to do the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative, we promised HUD that we would be updating the zoning code as part of that process. You want to go to the next slide? So here's some common terms. Michael kind of hinted at some of these, but we kind of want to lay them out so everybody could read them and kind of get a better idea. Land use plan, that's the general layout of place types and provides a vision for how the spaces within Flint could work. The neighborhoods, how are they structured? Is it a single family neighborhood? Is it primarily multifamily? Where are the parks at? Or where are the shopping areas? Industrial areas, things like that. Obviously, the zoning code, as I said, it's the law that regulates activities on land and the intensity of that activity. Permitted by right is something that the main structure or the main use is allowed in that zoning district. So a single family zoning district, obviously the most obvious permitted by right use would be a single family home. Accessory buildings or uses, these are secondary structures that can be used as a complement to a primary use. The most obvious one is a garage, something that you would see in more modern times maybe is like a little she shed, perhaps an accessory dwelling unit, a little mother-in-law suite that's built in the backyard, something like that. That's an accessory use. Special use is a use or structure that could negatively affect surrounding areas. Um, and these are, when someone's proposing one of those, you have to go before the planning commission to get approval for that. I think a good example of a special use would be, let's just use residential areas as a primary example. If you were going to do a child care center in a residential zone and you would have to go get a special use permission to do that. Another special use would be utility substations. Tend to see those a lot in residential areas, but that is a special use, not banned. They just, it gets a little bit of extra scrutiny from the planning commission in order to do it. Additionally regulated use. This is a new term, not a new concept, but the term additionally regulated use is something new under this zoning code. Under the current code, they're called special regulated uses. And they're a special use that requires a review process and additional location standards. And these, again, are reviewed quite closely by the Planning Commission. The most obvious example that we're all familiar with now of an additionally regulated use is our adult uses and marijuana uses. Those will be called additionally regulated uses under the zoning code. And variance, this is a deviation from a zoning provision that's granted when strict enforcement would cause undue hardship. The kind of things that you would go to the zoning board of appeals to ask for a variance are on required setbacks, fence heights. Those are the most obvious ones. Maybe materials or density changes too on a parcel. Those are the kind of things that you would ask for a variance for. I'll go to the next one. So these are the zoning districts. On the current districts you'll see there are on the left-hand side, or I'm sorry, yes, those are the current ones. Sorry, the photos are in the way, so I can't see the whole slide. And on the right-hand side, those are going to be the new zoning districts, and we laid them out in this table so that they kind of correspond to one another. So what was, or what is today an A1 district under the new code will most likely be a TN1, an A2, which I think most of the city is A2. Most of the residential districts in the city are A2. Those will most likely be a TN2, the traditional neighborhood 2. On down through there's the different commercial districts, different industrial and employment districts. And then at the very bottom, there are some new districts that don't have any corresponding zone in the current code. And we'll talk about those a little bit later. The green neighborhoods 1 and 2, those are both residential uses. The green innovation 1 and 2, those are new. Very confusing with green neighborhoods. I know I wasn't around when these were named. I would have named them something different because I think they're leading to a lot of confusion for folks. Institutional campus and university campus, those don't exist today, but those under the new code center around the existing universities and colleges that are in the city. And then open space. Open space doesn't exist under the current code. Under the new code, there is open space. That open space, however, I will point out, is the existing parks that are in the city. So we're not taking what was an industrial zone or residential zone and zoning that open space. The open space designation is for the current existing parks.
Jeffrey, I'm sorry, I do want to jump in really quickly. So this is a helpful kind of tidbit of information to keep in mind. So when you see TN1, that means that it's a less intense use. So there's less, in that case, there's less houses, less people. TN2 would be a medium density. That means that the uses are more intense. So you'll see that throughout the zoning districts. If you see the 1 that is a less intense and a 2 is a more intense. And I'm sorry, Teresa, I just cut you off.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure everybody who's all the participants that you all know that you do have these slides in the email that was sent out. So if you can't see the screen very well, you do have the slides in the email. All you have to do is download, or if you got a physical packet from NEH or from Michael, you have these materials so that you can follow along if you can't see the screen.
So this map is what the proposed zoning map is. You see the corresponding slides there. The gold and yellow colors and the very light greens, those are the residential areas. The blues, those are the new institutional areas. The purples, those are the traditional industrial and heavy commercial areas of the city. Obviously, that red and brick color in the center there, that's downtown. The really true emerald green, those are the open space. Those should correspond, if you are familiar with a map of Flint, those are the parks. And then you've got the green innovations, which are those slightly off green colors, one kind of teal and one a more grayish green, sort of spread throughout. Any questions about that?
Jeffrey, we did have a question in the chat. I'm glad you just asked that. June wanted to know, what is the difference between MR1 mixed residential and MR2 mixed residential? And I guess there's MR3 as well. So she was just asking, what's the difference between those?
Yeah, and again, as Michael said, the difference is in the intensity of use. So it'll be, the higher it goes, the more that's allowed there, and the more dense it's going to be. The bigger the buildings can be, that sort of thing. So the green neighborhood districts, these are designed to basically reimagine the neighborhoods that have really been devastated with houses that have been torn down or need to be torn down. It's an opportunity. They're still residential districts. You still can have a home there. You can still build a new home there. But it's an opportunity to create bigger parcels and get a more suburban type feel. So if you have an existing home and you're surrounded by 2 or 3 empty parcels that are in the land bank or the city owns, this is giving you the option of combining those with your house lot and getting a nice big lot that you can do a lot with. You can do some moderate agricultural uses by right on this area. So if you want to have a big garden, you can do that. If you want to do chickens and beekeeping, that's allowed. I think there is, I think you do have to get a special permit, but it is allowed in that area. And these are where those are at. So on the right is the green neighborhoods 1. Again, the less intense, still residential, but less intense. And then on the right-hand side is the green neighborhood 2, which is a little more density in them. Traditional neighborhoods. So these are established single-family neighborhoods with large lot sizes. TN2 is, again, typical Flint single-family neighborhood development. The TN1 and the TN2 are what are primarily the neighborhoods as they exist today. So you'll see kind of on the, if you think back on the map, on the north west side and the far northeast side, and then going down through the corresponding southeast and southwest and across the southern area of the city, that's where these neighborhoods are primarily located. So the mixed residential districts. So these are, so MR1 is small lot residential, townhomes and duplexes. MR2 would support more 1 and 2 story multifamily. And MR3, 3+ story, much higher density. And you can have some commercial uses on the first floors. And you can see those representations. The neighborhood center district, now you're getting into the more commercial areas. So neighborhood center districts, catch up to myself here. These are kind of the anchors of commercial and social activity at the key intersections throughout the city. These are the kind of things that you are used to driving past already. There's opportunities for smaller mixed use buildings that include local retail and services, dry cleaners, quickie marts, those sorts of things. And you can have residential or offices on the floors above. City corridor district, these are, a step up from the neighborhood center, a little bit more intense, more wide ranging types of commercial and institutional uses kind of strung along the major roadways. But the new code does have an emphasis on improved landscaping, improved parking regulations, safer access, and more walkability in and around these areas. So the downtown core and the edge districts, I mean, these are well, just like it says, the downtown core and the edge of downtown. It's the core multifamily and institutional office, retail, restaurants, those uses that you traditionally associate with a downtown. It should be pedestrian oriented, with the buildings more closer to the street rather than set back further, like in a more suburban shopping center. And then the commercial and employment districts, these are the old industrial areas, some of which are still in use and some of which are vacant and are ready for redevelopment. But they can be clusters of either light industrial research or offices, and they correspond to the main transportation hubs and roads within the city. Production center, again, this is down by the airport and the former GM facilities that are around and existing GM facilities. And again, the production center is just that step up in intensity from the commerce and employment district. So it's a little bit more intense use. So here's one of the new uses, the institutional campus district, which is a civic and cultural campus area dedicated to continued function and support of Flint's institutions like Mott Community College, like the cultural campus, the public library, and the public schools. And then the University Avenue Core District, this is around Hurley and Kettering, high intensity uses that are close to downtown, but you want to, in addition to the medical and educational uses, we also want to encourage business incubators, research and development centers, and new local entrepreneurs having a possibility to start their businesses and kind of grow in this area.
We had a question in the chat. Would you mind if I asked it, or would you like me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Giselle would like to know if, and maybe I don't know if we know this yet, with the new zoning codes, they haven't been adopted yet, Giselle, just so you're aware, but with the land bank, so how would that affect the way that the land bank allows you to acquire lots? So it says, with the new changes, will the land bank allow you to acquire more lots no matter the location? I believe you can only pick up parcels by your current home. I don't know if you guys know that yet, but
I don't. The city has no opposition to. Again, I said if you have a home and you have land bank lots on 3 or 4 sides of you, the city has no opposition to acquiring those. I don't know what the land bank's internal policy is on selling those side lots, whether they'll do just one. I came from the city of Cleveland's land bank, and our policy was if you were adding a side yard, you could only buy one, and it had to either be to the right or the left of you.
Right now, it's currently it's only adjacent property, but it seems like that would be more of a question for the land bank once this is adopted.
Yeah, I know they're very familiar with the plan and have been kind of guiding people as they're approached about things. I just got a call last week from somebody who was looking to buy a parcel that he wants to build like a social club on, and the land bank said, hey, this is slated to be zoned something else, so you might want to talk to the city before you do that. So they are aware of it, and I think if you have a conversation with them, they do know what is being proposed.
So Giselle, it sounds like we're going to have to do a little more research as this moves forward, because it sounds like that's a something that you would need to ask the land bank if they're going to change any of their policies about.
I just purchased a property from the land bank. Right now, it's only adjacent property to the right or the left. I purchased 2 on the left of myself. But as far as across the street, because I tried, not yet.
Okay.
I do want to point out really quick, it can be to the right, to the left, or actually behind, as long as it has, I believe, 50% of the boundary between this parcel and this parcel. They can be misaligned, but as long as 50% of that line is connected, then that's good to go as a side lot.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Giselle, for your question.
So the next new area, new zone that's brand new and doesn't have anything contemplated, anything like this in the current code, are the green innovation districts. There's green innovation 1 and green innovation 2. So the point of the master plan was developed, and the accompanying zoning code, the intent was to remain flexible and be consistent and sensitive with regard to surrounding land uses, including single family homes. The point of the green innovation districts is to provide an opportunity for a wide array of redevelopment in areas that have been largely vacated. These zones can attract new green businesses, new innovative entrepreneurs, or in Green Innovation 1, it has to be pointed out, you could also still purchase a lot and build a house, build a single family home. You want to go to the next slide? So the Green Innovation 1s are located around and within residential districts, so that they're less intense uses. And the point of that is to kind of buffer nearby residences from future uses. The Green Innovation 2, those were primarily located near the CE and the PC districts, the more industrial commercial uses, because they're anticipating more intense uses, basically, when we wanted to keep those separated from residential uses so that there wasn't the problem with nuisance noise or smoke or things like that, too much traffic. But the Green Innovation 1 zones, those would be like innovative agricultural uses that complement a residential area and shouldn't cause that much of an issue. And then the community open space district, again, as I talked about before, community open space, it only covers the currently established city-owned parks and open spaces. So this zoning code is very intense. We only walk through the actual zones, but there are all sorts of other provisions in there. All these articles define the other stuff that it talks about. So there's a whole article on parking, loading, and circulation. The current zoning code doesn't have any of that. Loading and circulation, to explain that in lay terms, that's kind of like the easiest way to describe that would be like a restaurant with a drive-through. It has loading and circulation, talk about those sorts of things. The current zoning code doesn't even contemplate those. It has landscaping standards to kind of make parking areas and screening areas better. There are environmental protection areas. The sign section has been beefed up a little bit. And then there are applications and procedures that are described in there, and then the administration and enforcement actions. All this stuff is available on the Imagine Flint website. I didn't want to get into it too much because, I mean, your eyes might already be glazing over. I can't see everybody, but we wanted to keep it somewhat relatable to folks. So one thing I did want to talk about, because in my time here, I've notice that there's some confusion about green neighborhoods versus green innovation districts. Green neighborhoods, GN, are residential areas first and foremost. They're neighborhoods that have experienced significant population decline. So we want to take the land that's there and provide that as an opportunity for residents to combine lots with their primary use for a more suburban, I hate the word estate, but estate-like setting. And the land vacancy has created an opportunity for people to integrate more small-scale green uses like community gardens and things like that into their residential uses. The green innovation areas are in areas that have experienced 80 to 90% vacancy. So there really are no homes in those areas anymore. Although, as I said, Green Innovation 1 does allow for new single family home construction. Green Innovation 2 districts don't allow for residential uses because if you recall, I said those are designed or contemplated to be more intense uses where you don't want to be living next door to them necessarily. So the point of them is to provide an opportunity for a wide array of redevelopment uses that people can come to the city with. And the goal is to help return vacant land to productive use as best we can. And provide as much flexibility to not only current residents, but current businesses and people that want to relocate into Flint as well. So there were some concerns. So this is the third go around for the zoning code. I believe this is the third time it's been introduced. It was introduced, I think, in 2017, and then was introduced again in 2019, and council delayed it both times. So we are introducing it again this year. It has been introduced to council. I'll get into more of that in the end. But there was a lot of feedback when it was initially published and people were able to review it. They reviewed the steering committee, that 21-member committee of residents, reviewed the draft zoning code over 14 months, and they passed along their own recommendations. There were a total of 3 drafts that were released for public comment, and then workshops were held all over to get people's feedback. To date, we've gotten over 100 public comments, and a lot of those have been incorporated into the new code. Like, for instance, new single-family housing construction that's permitted by right in green innovation. That initially was not in the code, but we heard from residents that they wanted that to be allowed. And so it has been changed to do that. Non-conforming uses that exist today under the zoning code, if under the new zoning code, that is now not a conforming use, you are going to be grandfathered in. So it's not, you're not going to be told, oh, you have to move because the zoning's changed, or, oh, your business can't be here anymore because the zoning's changed. I mean, I guess the one thing I would point out there is, as it is bolded and italicized, it has to be a legally established non-conforming use. If it's an illegal chop shop that's operating, it's not legal today, and it won't be legal under the new code either. However, if the business has gone through the process of getting a variance or getting a special use permit for their use, it's still going to be allowed under the new code. And again, some of the comments that we've got, those are all listed on the Imagine Flint site. If you go into there, there's a specific section on the zoning code, and a lot of all the materials that all my predecessors put together, it's all posted on there. And we will be giving it an update here shortly as we get some stuff prepared for the new push. We will be updating it to get some of the other stuff on there. So I'll just briefly, before I hand it over to Michael, talk about the next steps. As I said, the entire code can be reviewed on the Imagine Flint website. It was reintroduced to council in January. January 25th was the first night it was introduced. It was pushed into committee that night. It went to a couple of committee meetings, and they sent it back to council. I would say that last week, it did pass its first reading. I should also add that we have split the code up. So we're giving it to council in little pieces. So what was introduced in January is all the stuff that I talked about tonight, all the different zoning uses. Those are what are before council now. Those are what have passed their first reading. After those are passed, we'll introduce, in total there, I don't know if you remember the slide, there are 18 articles in the zoning code. So we gave them the first 6 in January. Once they adopt those, we'll introduce the next 6, walk them through that. Once they adopt those, we will then bring them the last 6 articles to be introduced and gone through. Once they adopt those, then the entire zoning code will be in place. So it's not like once they pass the stuff on green innovation and TN1, that's suddenly going to be law and we're going to be operating under 2 zoning codes. We're going to wait until the zoning code is completely adopted and then it will be implemented, and that's what folks will be using. But until then, anything that you do is under the old zoning code. And if you say everything gets through by August 1st, if you come in on July 31st with an application for something, the old code is what's going to apply. We're not going to apply. You're not going to have to suddenly go back and redo things for the new code. Anything that's in process will apply with the rules that were in place when it was the application was received. So with that, I will stop mumbling on and I'll let Michael walk you.
So we do actually have a couple questions that maybe you can address. The first one is from Karma asking, would we be able to start a hemp farm inside a green innovation zone?
I would think so, but in Ohio, hemp was regulated at the state, not at the local level. Is it the same in Michigan or is it different?
I would doubt that anybody on this call knows the answer to that question.
I would have to look into it. I would say in Ohio.
I know what it is.
Mark, go ahead.
I have a hemp license, and yes, you can grow it, and but it is regulated by the state. And I'm not going to renew it because the new license is going to be over $1,000. So the license is quite restrictive, but you can do it in the city.
Thank you, Mark. Could everybody hear that?
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, I heard that.
Okay. Thank you. A little quiet.
I have a quick question about clarification on the process of getting this approved. Can I ask that now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my understanding is once City Council has approved the whole package, then it goes out to for public comment on 3 different meetings. I know the planning committee,
Planning
Commission. Yeah.
Planning Commission had some pre-meetings before City Council, but I was told that they're going to have 3 more after City Council says yes, and then it goes back to City Council to confirm it again. Is that correct?
That's not my understanding. I mean, as it's working its way through council now, there is a public comment period with the readings. Because when I read the code, what it says currently is once City Council adopts it, it will be effective 90 days later. I think we're going to change that to make sure that we don't get caught in that in-between zone.
So when do we get to make that public comment?
Well, the public, you would
at 2:00 in the morning when they're discussing it.
Yeah, I mean it's available for public comment. I mean there were public comments beforehand, but the most recent ones now are yes when it is being debated by council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And then we do have one last question from Mary Joyce asking about how will violations be enforced?
So there are, in the enforcement section, there are the zoning official or zoning coordinator can issue a zoning violation notice. There are some areas, areas of the zoning code that can be enforced by the building inspection folks. So things like one thing that the zoning code includes is regulations on parking cars in yards. So that's something that can now be ticketed. And I believe those are done either by the zoning official or by one of the building inspectors.
Cool. All right. We do just have a few minutes left here, so I'm going to rush through this. If anybody does have any additional questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to myself or Jeffrey. Can I ask somebody to please drop both of our email addresses in the chat, and you can go ahead and reach out to us that way. So I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about land use. So just to draw a quick distinction, the master plan, Imagine Flint planning process, folks were commenting on how they would like to see land used. And Jeffrey talked about this before, but the distinction between the land use plan and the zoning plan is that the zoning plan is actually the laws and regulations that regulate the land uses that that folks identified throughout that process. So I'm just going to give it a quick run through about how this affects development in your neighborhood. So in a green neighborhood, this is really looking at sort of a combination of both the larger lot spaces as well as small scale urban agriculture. So in green neighborhoods, you can have uses like community gardens. And I'm going to try to keep this most pertinent to what I know folks on this call are interested in doing. So you can do things like a smaller scale community garden. You can have an orchard under 11 trees. You can have some coop houses and larger scale growing operations, as long as it is not for commercial use. So that would be something that you either consume yourself or that you give out to folks in the neighborhood. In a traditional neighborhood, we're mostly looking at, rather than having the urban agriculture as sort of an open space amenity, in a traditional neighborhood, the parks and open spaces are those parks that already exist. You have a couple larger lots, but all of it is single family. And then the mixed residential, you both have a combination of the single family attached. So think of like townhomes, things like that. And then multifamily, which is larger apartment buildings. And in mixed residential zones, you can have the same kind of green, quote unquote, uses like the farming, things like that, as long as it is an accessory use to the primary use, which would be a residential structure. Then just a little bit into the commercial land use. So I like to bring this up because this plays a lot into the way that we work and that the land bank works, where, you know, when we're trying to make decisions about where to prioritize investment, we are looking at this these land uses as sort of a guiding element. So, you know, if we're looking at, okay, well, where in this neighborhood do we want to really invest in streetscape improvements, as an example, or commercial facade improvements, we would you know, consider the neighborhood center, city corridor, sort of the primary areas where we would want to direct that investment. Again, because that is, you know, sort of in accordance with the vision that the residents set out in 2015 and 16. You can also see here neighborhood centers allow for commercial uses as well as mixed use. You might think of, I'm trying to think if there are examples. I guess really only downtown you have the example of a storefront on the bottom floor with apartment units above. City corridor also allows for some of those things, as well as the, you know, you can think of the difference between a neighborhood center and a city corridor, kind of like the neighborhood center is where you have the your locally owned Ace Hardware store. The city corridor is where you would have the big box Best Buy, right? So that's kind of the distinction there. And then downtown, we all know what downtown looks like. I don't need to get into that. The last few things, and I know we are running low on time, but the industrial employment land use patterns, commerce and employment, there is some multifamily units allowed there, and that's primarily because these are areas with lots of employees going to work, so it makes sense for those areas to have denser uh, apartment units or multifamily townhomes, things like that adjacent to them. And then the production center is really, we want to keep that away from the rest of the residential areas, because that is a much more intensive industrial use. And then finally, green innovation. So this is kind of a mix between the two. You have both the industrial and employment elements, which are those larger scale agriculture, where you would actually be you would be able to produce produce for sale. You can even have things like pop-up farmers markets and things like that in the green innovation zone. And then you also have the mix of the lighter and heavy industrial uses, which would specifically be around things like food processing and agriculture, research, as well as aquaculture and green energy. So you see in the master use table, there is uses such as, I think, very small scale, but smaller scale wind farms would be allowed in certain former industrial zones, the GI2, as well as solar array fields, things like that for more energy production. And just sort of the unifying characteristic between the commerce and employment, the production, and the residential is just the unifying characteristic of sort of green uses. The other thing I wanted to point out here, so we draw a distinction between urban agriculture, which is the more intensive, sometimes commercial production of crops and produce. So this is a primary use, meaning that you do not have to get any kind of variance or permission from the Planning Commission, any additional permission from the Planning Commission to install in the green innovation. Or you can see on this map here, there's the sort of dashed overlay where urban agriculture is allowed, versus the community garden, which is something that you might decide to lease a few land bank lots and install just a community garden, where these would be a primary use, again, in the green neighborhoods, and complementary use in traditional neighborhoods and mixed residential, meaning that in some instances you might need to get a special permission to install a community garden, or you might be required to have a primary use being a house, and then a secondary or accessory use as the community garden. You would need to have that house there to be the primary in order to do the garden, which is secondary. So hopefully that clears a little bit of that up. And we are digging a little bit into our next presentation, but that's also me. So I don't have any problem delaying my own presentation. If there are any additional questions that we can touch on
Michael, we did
somewhat quickly.
Oh, Michael,
Yeah.
I had a question that I don't know if that was that Ashley.
Yeah, it was. Go ahead, Teresa.
Okay, probably the same question. Mark wanted to know, can you have roadside stands in the green innovation or in green neighborhood #1? I'm sorry.
Yes, so let me just check here. A produce stand is considered an accessory use. So again, you would need to have the primary use, which would be, I'm going to go through the residential districts where this is allowed. You would need to have residential structure in addition to the produce stand. That's in green neighborhoods, traditional neighborhoods, and mixed residential neighborhoods. It is also allowed as a special use in Green Innovation 1. So those are the former primarily residential areas, and it is permitted by right. So you don't, again, need additional permission if you're installing that in a GI2, which is the sort of former industrial. And again, this is all in the master use table. I find this an extremely useful tool, which again, this is linked in the emails that Teresa sent. Mobile food trucks. That's a good question. I know that there was a reasonable amount of debate on that topic. I don't know if Jeffrey, you're aware of where that discussion landed, if those are being regulated under the draft zoning code.
I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to go back and look it up. I don't remember reading them. I've read it myself probably 3 times. I don't remember seeing food trucks, but
I, yeah, I think if I recall correctly, the way that we were addressing that was if you have a mobile food truck on a lot that is zoned or adjacent to a lot which is zoned for commercial use or some of these other accessory uses, then that would be allowed. As an example, Tenacity Brewing has a mobile food truck that they have in their uh, parking lot area. So that's an example of like, okay, well, that is being used in an area that's already zoned for commercial. And then we have another question for Mark. If approved as is, how do we make changes as the need becomes obvious? So as needs change within the city, how are changes to the zoning code made? Jeffrey, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, so the changes will be made either in conjunction with council, or if the master plan were updated or overhauled and we did a zoning code update as part of that. Those are the two mechanisms where the changes will be made. If it's a really obvious thing that needs to be addressed right away, it would have to go through council and they would amend the zoning code.
And just to add to that, so if the if it, you know, kind of the change is needed in a specific location, like if you're trying to use a parcel for something that it's not zoned for, you can potentially get a variance. That's something that you have to bring to the planning commission in order for them to approve it. They would have to, you know, investigate, okay, well, does it meet these requirements to place in the non-conforming district? Did I get that right, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so if we don't have any more questions, let's go ahead to our post workshop evaluation. So the first question here, I know what types of activities are allowed in Flint's various zoning districts according to the draft zoning ordinance. So according to the proposed zoning ordinance that we just presented, if you definitely know what types of activities are allowed, click A. If you mostly do, that's B. Not sure is C. Mostly not is D. And if you definitely do not know what types of activities are allowed in the various districts, that is letter E. We got a few responses coming in. Beautiful. All right.
Thank you. I don't feel like a complete
Yeah, we can take our bows now. And again, any additional questions you can direct towards Jeffrey or myself. I see our email addresses are in the chat box there. Let's go ahead to the next evaluation question. I know the difference between a land use or structure that is permitted by right as an accessory to another use, a special use, or an additionally regulated use. If you definitely do, that is letter A. Mostly, that's B. Not sure is C. Mostly not is D. And definitely not. If you definitely do not know the difference between a land use, I'm not going to go through them again. That is letter E. So beautiful. Again, these are all definitions that we lay out in the supplementary materials. The beauty of the master table is that it does list accessory, special, additionally regulated, et cetera, for all of the different use types. So that's very helpful. Awesome. Jeffrey, do you have any closing thoughts before we go on? You are muted if you...
I was trying to click my thumbnail to unmute myself. It's been a long day. Now, again, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Michael or I. If this is something you would really like to see happen, you would like to see some movement, I would urge you to contact your council person and make them aware of that. We all know how council works in Flint, but the more positive feedback we can get, the better. And even if you think there are issues with it, let's get it implemented and tackle the issues when we know that they are definitely a problem. We're not saying that it's perfect. We want to get it implemented and start using it so that we can see where the flaws are at, for sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey.